All this talk about Dreiser and Dewey and Truman and deadlines has brought me here to the University of Missouri in Columbia, because I think those stories do have some relevance to today's journalism, with the demands and the challenges of the 24-hour news cycle and social media. And what better place to talk journalism than Mizzou? And I knew just the guy I wanted to talk to. You find him in this building. He's the director of the Jonathan B. Murray Center for Documentary Journalism. But for decades, Professor Stacey Woelfel not only taught broadcast journalism in the classroom, but as the news director at Mizzou's commercial TV station. He trained students to be reporters, anchors, and producers. And so while you might not know him, you almost certainly have seen one of his former students.
You've, I would say, trained, taught, mentored a generation of local TV reporters. I can't imagine you go to any city in the country and turn on the TV, you're likely to see one of your students.
It's true. I say I have a free beer waiting in almost any market. I just have to call up and collect.
And how are they doing, do you think? I mean, sometimes you must think, wow, I did a good job, and sometimes you must be shaking your head thinking, I thought I taught him or her better than that.
Well, it's a micro, macro thing. On the macro level, I often thought when I was still teaching in the newsroom, am I sending them out into a business that is worth working for? And I think I slept well at night thinking that I did, that while not everything I see on television news is top-notch, that we were training people to do a good job. And then the micro part, when I go in those markets and I see them or I look them up online or they send me something, I'm pretty proud of what they're doing. And I always said, every story is not going to be your best story. But I said, if you come home and at the end of the week, two out of the 5 days you work, you felt pretty good, you know, you're batting 400 and you're going to make it in the Hall of Fame.
Do they ever call you for advice? Do they ever get put in a position where they're not quite sure ethically, journalistically, what they should do?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear probably with those ethical questions several times a year. Call up, typically it's an issue with a manager, so this is a entry level or a reporter level employee, and a manager, a news director, somebody else is doing something that they think is not ethical, and so they fall back on their Missouri training and their Missouri professors to say, what would you do in this situation? And I usually have an answer. It's not always the one they want, but I usually have an answer.
I did this kind of work for years, and as you can see, I started a long time ago. I know it's a different media world that today's broadcast journalism grads are going into.
I'm sure you've got people working in the networks, right, or cable, national cable TV, but a lot of your students have gone to local TV.
The vast majority.
Yeah. Is that still a healthy market? Is it still an exciting career, or is it changing like everything else?
I would say both. I think it's still an exciting career to get in there. I'm a little worried, and they're a little worried about the workload and what they have to do. And when you were doing local news, when I was doing local news before I taught, we had a reasonable amount of time to go tell our stories.
You had the 5, the 6, and the 10, and then you went home.
Right, and we had, during the day, we could spend a good amount of the day reporting. We could go out and collect facts. Now, as soon as you come in, you're out, you're live at a location for 3 newscasts. When can you report? When can you go someplace to do that? So that's my biggest worry. The ones who are really dedicated, really the best at it, are figuring out a way to make that work and to deliver on all the other platforms.
Yeah, the technology has sort of raced ahead of the journalism.
I'd say that it's not so much that it's raced ahead, that it's erased the journalism in many cases, in that you're so busy pumping out information, you don't have time to collect the information. So where do you get it? You get it from other reporters, you repeat the same thing over and over again, and so our total amount of information that we're gathering as journalists is much less than it used to be.
How different was it when you first started teaching? Has it changed within that period of time?
Oh yeah, that was 1986, and so you talk about newscasts at KOMU, our teaching lab, we had a 6 and a 10 and a noon. So nothing online, nothing on social media, of course. And so that was a chance for those students to really craft what they were working on. There's not as much craft as there used to be, not on daily news. In the longer form and longer deadline journalism, the craft is great. And I think we're seeing a lot of really good work there.
Yeah, in news traditionally, you want to be first, you want to beat the competition, but you always say, we want to be first, but we want to be right. And we'd rather be right than first. I'm not sure that that really applies today.
Well, people say that we'd rather be right than first. They don't do that,
Yeah.
I think, is the problem. Because if you aren't first too often, then they'll find somebody else to take your job and be first.
Do you find, as both a journalist and having been a professor and a mentor, are you worried about the role of journalism in America today?
I am. We're fighting a political fight where part of the electorate has come to despise the news media, which, again, obviously I'm on the side that's not going to do that, but I'm like, we're looking out for people. And we were talking about a campaign that I think probably should be done where we inform people about all the things journalists have done. If you like the fact that your hairdryer doesn't blow asbestos onto your head anymore, that was an investigative reporter who figured that out. If you like the fact that your whole credit card number doesn't show up on your receipt when you make a purchase, that was an investigative reporter who worked that out. And so we don't do a good job telling our story. We tend to get indignant about things rather than falling back on our ability to teach on something like that. So that worries me a lot, that it seems like, certainly so far, a larger and larger percentage of our potential audience, and in the bigger picture, the electorate, the democracy, the people who make the democracy work, have decided that we're not worth paying attention to.
And yet, I could speculate, without knowing for sure, that there'd be a new crop of young people who, because of that enemies of the people, sort of the anti-journalism, anti-fact, whatever you want to call it, might be coming in inspired to continue this work in maybe the same way that young people came in after Watergate.
Well, that was us. I think that was our generation. That was definitely one of the reasons I decided to do journalism. I'm like, these reporters brought down a president. I want to do that. And you're right. I think maybe, and we may not see them in journalism school for a few years. They might be in junior high or high school right now, but check back in 4 or 5 years and they might be filling the halls here.